If you're preparing for the CCE alongside full-time clinical work, this video is for you. I'm going to walk through the study strategies that work for this exam because the CCE requires a fundamentally different approach from the AKT and KFP. Most candidates study the CCE the same way they studied for the written exams. They read, they make notes, they try to memorize content, and then they walk into a live, timed, examiner-observed exam and discover that none of that preparation translates. What I'm going to share with you is the approach I've developed coaching over 60 doctors through the CCE. These are the strategies that consistently separate candidates who pass from candidates who don't. The single biggest shift candidates need to make when moving from the written exams to the CCE is stop studying silently. The CCE doesn't test what you can recognize on a page. It tests what you can say out loud in sequence under time to pressure. That's a distinct skill, and it requires its own focused preparation. Here's a simple self-test you can do right now. Close whatever you're studying, turn to the person next to you or an empty chair if you're alone, and explain the topic as if you were presenting to a junior medical student. If you can't do that fluently, you haven't learnt it at the level the CCE requires. And that's regardless of how well you understood it when you were reading it. Now, an important note here. This doesn't mean you should memorize scripts. Scripted answers are actually frowned upon by the examiners because they can sound robotic and they fail to adapt when the patient says something unexpected. What you want instead is a framework, a consistent structure for organizing your response that you can populate with case-specific content in real time. The structure stays the same, but the details change with each patient. Next, structure your study around your energy. Not all study hours are equal. For most candidates, a focused hour in the morning is worth more than 2 exhausted hours at night. But it's not realistic to only study in the morning. So here's how I recommend thinking about it. When your energy is high, that's when you tackle the difficult cognitive tasks. Content you've forgotten since the AKT and KFP, new clinical topics, building understanding from scratch. This is what takes the most cognitive effort. So do it when you're the sharpest and the most alert. When your energy is medium, that's for active practice, working through cases, verbalizing answers out loud, practicing clinical examinations, and reviewing flashcards. With this type of practice, you're applying knowledge rather than building it. Your energy is low, that's for passive review, reading through familiar notes, revising material you've already consolidated, reviewing visual content like term images, ECGs, and X-rays. This keeps knowledge warm without demanding deep concentration. This approach is particularly relevant if you're balancing full-time clinical work with exam prep. If you only have 60 to 90 minutes a day, allocating that time according to your energy level makes a measurable difference over several months. My next tip for structuring your CCE exam prep is to build familiarity through volume and variety. The CCE can test a broad range of clinical knowledge across 12 competency domains. You can't predict which presentations will come up, but you can make sure that nothing feels completely unfamiliar. And the way to do that is work through as many cases as possible across the widest breadth of topics you can. This is especially important for presentations you're not confident in. The temptation is to avoid those cases and focus on your strengths. But the opposite approach is what builds exam readiness. When you've practiced structuring an answer on a topic you are unsure about multiple times, it becomes second nature to do the same thing under pressure on exam day, even if the specific presentation is one you didn't expect. Expose yourself to everything. Common presentations and uncommon ones. Pediatrics, mental health, medico-legal scenarios, cultural safety cases. The goal isn't to memorize all of the answers. It's more so to build the confidence that no matter what comes up, you have a structured approach that works. Next, use real patients as study triggers. The conventional advice is to see more patients to prepare for the CCE. That's not wrong, but it's incomplete. Seeing patients passively without deliberately connecting the encounter to your study doesn't build the structural clinical reasoning the exam requires. A more effective approach is this. When you see a patient with a presentation that would make a good case, for example, chest pain, abdominal pain, urinary incontinence. Treat it like a mock station. Take a structured history the way you would in the real CCE exam. Examine the patient from top to toe thoroughly. Explain your differentials, diagnosis, and management out loud, following a clear framework. Obviously, this won't work for every patient. A MedCert request or a straightforward cold isn't going to really be the best preparation. But for presentations with real clinical depth, like, "Doc, I have abdominal pain," use them as live practice. Also, when you encounter a presentation you're not fully confident managing, use that as your study trigger for the evening. Research the topic, work through the differentials, refresh yourself on the guidelines. If appropriate, get the patient in for a further review and use that follow-up consultation as an opportunity to reconsolidate what you've learned by applying it in a clinical setting. That way, your clinical work becomes part of your study system, not separate from it, and you're fully utilizing your 8 to 4 in the clinic. Now let's talk about structuring your preparation overall. One principle before the specifics. It is vital to start with the right foundations. How you use your reading time, how you structure your answers, how you approach each case type. These are habits that form early in your preparation, and it's far easier to build them correctly from day one than to unlearn bad habits after a failed attempt. With that in mind, here's the approach I recommend. Start with cases under exam conditions. The foundation of CCE prep is practicing with realistic cases. Cases that are too short, too simple, or formatted differently from the actual exam create false confidence. You need cases that replicate the complexity, timing, and structure of the real CCE so that exam day feels familiar, not foreign. Practice under timed conditions from the beginning. Set a timer for 20 minutes per station, 5 minutes reading time, and 15 minutes of actual station time. Record yourself if possible, or work with a study partner who can use role-play scripts to simulate the patient encounters. The goal here isn't to get the right answer. It's to practice delivering a structured response within the time constraints. That's the skill the CCE is actually testing. The next tip is to address knowledge gaps with targeted review. Your cases will reveal gaps in your knowledge, and when they do, address them efficiently rather than restudying everything from scratch. It's far more effective to use concise clinical topic guides that cover differentials, red flags, examination, investigation, management for specific presentations, rather than rereading entire textbook chapters, the entire VTG, or up to date on that particular topic. Focus your review on what your practice cases have shown where you have forgotten potential knowledge from the AKT or KFP instead of covering every single topic all over again. Next, reinforce with active recall. There's typically a 6-month gap between the AKT KFP and the CCE. That's 6 months in which everything you consolidated for the AKT and KFP is gradually leaking away. Think of your memory as an inflatable pool with a small hole in it. Every time you study, you're filling the pool. But if you stop, the water level will drop quickly. Doing constant repetition with flashcards tops it back up. But the real goal is consolidation, or patching that hole so that the knowledge stays. That's why spaced repetition works. You don't just see the material again, you retrieve it at increasing intervals so that the memory moves more into long-term storage. For CCE preparation specifically, the most effective approach is to build your preparation around verbal recall. Practice how you would say the answer to an examiner, how you'd recognize it on a page. That's the difference between AKT level knowledge and CCE level performance. And finally, book a mock exam. This is one preparation step that consistently separates candidates who pass from candidates who don't. They undertake a full mock exam under realistic conditions with live examiner feedback. You see, self-study reveals knowledge gaps, but a mock exam reveals performance gaps. The habits, timing, errors, and structural weaknesses that only become visible when someone is watching and scoring. A mock exam is particularly valuable for identifying your potential CCE failure patterns. You may not realize, or your study partner may not have told you, that you're over-rambling, you're over-investigating, there's a lot of safety concerns that you've missed, until an experienced examiner tells you directly. If you want to put these strategies into practice, Fellow Academy gives you the cases, clinical topic guides, and flashcards to build the exact preparation system I've been describing. Our free trial includes 8 CCE cases, so you can see how it works. If you haven't seen it yet, I'd also recommend watching my video on CCE exam day strategies. I'll link it here.